Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode, before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is One Piece East Blue Saga Orangetown Arc, Episode 8, Who Will Win? Showdown between the true powers of the Devil Fruit. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what's happening within this current episode. Buggy has a flashback to his time as a pirate apprentice with Shanks before the battle between Buggy and Luffy continues, and Little Buggy is created. Then the crew leaves the island to head to their next adventure. After rewatching each episode, I create a ranking for that episode on two separate lists. The first list is mostly objective, which means that it is void of emotion. And then the second list is my personal list, which is entirely emotion based. And so we'll start with the mostly objective ranking, which the values are in the chart on screen, and I've highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. This episode didn't have any negatives, which is great. However, every episode starts at a base score of 0, and then based on the points, that is how we score it. So on the positive side, we have a resolved battle, which of course is the Luffy versus Buggy battle. Finishes within this episode. It was started previous episode. This episode finishes it. I don't necessarily know if I want to call it a battle, as there's a lot of talking and sort of pauses to the action in order to take comedic breaks or have other characters interfere, so on and so forth. But either way, the battle is stated in the title, so we're going to call it a resolved battle, and that is worth 2 points. And then worth an additional 3 points, we have our multi-arc supporting character development, which is for Buggy, and you could say a little bit of Shanks as well, as it's telling basically the backstory of how Buggy knows Shanks and what exactly it is that Buggy is blaming Shanks for, which I'll go into more detail in my personal ranking. But basically, that development is seen within the flashback. And I suppose you could also call the creation of Little Buggy a little bit of development as well of the character. But again, I'll go more in detail in my personal ranking for that, which then basically with those two pieces of positive value, we get a 5 out of 10 for this episode objectively. And disappointingly, that puts this episode in last place for the arc. So this arc was 5 episodes total. We have now watched all of the episodes that are within this Orangetown arc. And the final definitive ranking for this arc on the objective scale is in first place, Luffy's past, the red-haired Shanks appears. Second place was Grand Duel, Zoro the Swordsman versus Kavaji the Acrobat. Third was Desperate Situation, Beast Tamer Moji versus Luffy. Fourth was Fear, Mysterious Power, Pirate Clown Captain Buggy. And as mentioned, this one's fifth, Who Will Win? Showdown between the true powers of the Devil Fruit. So now it's time for my personal ranking, and this episode is one of the prime examples of why I have two lists. In the objective list, it only scored a 5, which I think is very undeserving, but as I mentioned, the objective list is devoid of emotion. I personally really enjoyed this episode. That is why I think it's such a pity, and that is why we have the two episodes, because I'm obviously going to rank it much higher than it was objectively ranked. So basically, with this episode, we get our flashback, which develops Buggy's character and a little bit of Shanks as well. So we basically have Shanks and Buggy on their pirate ship as pirate apprentices, and they're in an argument. The crew's laughing, then they're attacked. During that attack, Buggy happens to find on one of the enemies a rolled up map which shows a treasure that is located on the sea floor. He then starts to daydream, or rather, He's out there at night, kind of making his plans for the future to jump ship, go get this treasure, become a pirate captain of his own. He gets to leave a little earlier than he had planned because he's got this map now. And then Shanks appears and he has to, of course, hide the map. And then they start musing while looking at the stars about their future plans. And Shanks lets him know about the loot that they had gotten, which happens to be a devil fruit. And at first, Buggy isn't really interested in the devil fruit, but then Shanks mentions that it can be sold for like 100,000 berry. Or was it 100 million? I think it was 100,000. But anyways, Buggy gets very excited about that because that can be his seed money to go find the treasure. So he then makes plans to steal the fruit, and he does so by pretending to eat it, by eating a fake fruit, so that the crew will think that it's already been used, and he does this in front of the crew. And then secretly at night, in a lifeboat that he's planning to steal away with the map and the fruit, Shanks once again comes up behind him and he decides that the best place he can hide this fruit is inside of his mouth. Shanks basically says what he wants to say, starts to leave, warning Buggy not to keep stealing too much food or the ship's chef is going to get upset at him. And then as he's walking away, Shanks remembers that the captain had told him something, so he comes back again to tell Buggy what it is he had forgotten to say the first time, which startles Buggy into swallowing. This, of course, makes Buggy, horrifies Buggy, makes him angry because now he has eaten the devil fruit he was going to sell for a lot of money. And then to make matters worse, his map starts to fall towards the ocean. So he jumps in after it. And of course, having just eaten the devil fruit, cannot swim. And so Shanks has to dive in and save his life. And to me, it is a really funny backstory because it's entirely his fault. He's like, Shanks can never be forgiven. And it's like, you did it to yourself. You hid the fruit in your mouth. You chose to swallow it. You did that. Like, you chose to steal it. That was on you. Sure, Shanks was the one who startled you, but like, literally, he had no way of knowing. That's not his fault. And then ultimately, Shanks saved his life. So really, this grudge should not be held, but it's Buggy, and that's just a Buggy thing to do. That's essentially his character development backstory. And then we also, once that's done, basically Luffy comments on the fact that Shanks saved his life. Buggy yells at him that that's not the point. The point is that it delayed his plans by like 10 years and that, he lost his treasure. Speaking of treasure, he then goes to attack Nami, who is running around with a bag full of his treasure. It's This again is another little bit of like comedy and amusement where he's telling Nami to let go of his treasure. And Nami, of course, refuses because she is a thief who steals from pirates. She has stolen this treasure from him. It now is hers. And then he's obviously not on board with that. But before he can attack her, Luffy basically pulls his foot out of his shoe and starts playing with the foot. He like smacks the foot, slams it down hard like he's harming it, but tickles it a bit. I find feet disgusting. I don't care whose feet they are. Feet just bother me. I think they're gross, just on a visceral level. So that would be my main negative to this episode, is the whole foot play thing. I'm like, ugh, do you have to touch feet? And like, this is a pirate. I don't know how cleanly they are, like how hygienic they are. So again, I don't like the foot thing. But anyways, after the whole foot thing, Buggy eventually gets his hands on the treasure. He and Nami start a game of tug of war, which Luffy puts an end to. Oh, it should be also noted at this point when he's doing like while he's playing with the feet, like while he's attacking Nami, Luffy also hits him again where it hurts to stop him attacking her briefly. But he did that last episode, so at this point it's kind of a repetitive gag, but it still was funny. Anyways, when they're playing their tug of war, Luffy then stops the tug of war by kicking Buggy in the head on behalf of the mayor, who he had knocked out the previous episode. And of course, once Buggy is temporarily knocked unconscious, all of his body parts fall to the ground. Luffy starts to think it's over. However, Buggy then gets up. However, when he goes to reassemble all of his parts, Nami has tied up most of his parts, basically his torso, his arms, his legs, leaving him with just basically his head and neck, hands and feet to come together. And this is the creation of little Buggy, which is so adorable. I've mentioned before, I have a huge bias for Buggy, so basically everything that has to do with Buggy is amazing to me. But little Buggy is just super special, super adorable. And then, of course, to settle everything, make sure everything is correctly done, Luffy bazookas little Buggy off into the stars, well, it's not a sunset, there's no stars, um, into the blue sky to who knows where. Obviously, Buggy's crew, they temporarily wake up wondering what to do now that their captain's gone and decide to just keep playing dead. And that continues. Nami semi joins the crew. She agrees to go traveling with them, but she says she's never going to join a pirate crew. Luffy, of course, hears that as she is officially joining the pirate crew, but technically she hasn't yet. And then, of course, this is the point when the villagers arrive in their destroyed village, see the outsiders, and Luffy, being the naive and honest person that he is, decides to tell them that yes, he was the one who knocked out the mayor, and yes, they are pirates. And Zoro laughs at this, Nami panics over it, and they, of course, then get chased out by the villagers. Shushu, who we remember from the beginning of the arc, helps to waylay the villagers so that they can get to the boats. Once they get to the boats, it's basically full circle with that trio of buggy pirates. Nami tricked them out of their boat. Then they sunk. Zoro then brought them onto his boat and scared them into being his rowers because he kind of beat them up. And now they arrive at the boat and they start acting all arrogant about Nami, trying to get their revenge. However, then they realize that Zoro's there, become afraid, run off, they get their boats, they start sailing away. The mayor wakes up, runs after them to try to thank them, and does manage to yell from the deck where they can hear that he is thankful to them. And that is when we realize that Luffy, as the generous, kind-hearted person that he is, left half of the treasure for them to be able to rebuild their town, much to Nami's dismay. Now, another negative that's not really a negative, I've mentioned before how Nami kind of has like a changeable personality, potentially due to her connection to the weather and her weather powers that she gets in the future with her weapon, with her climate act. Spoiler for the future. However, I find that because Luffy is a little bit on they make him stupid for comedic purposes. He obviously is not stupid and has his moments of seriousness and such, but he really is more of a comedy character, very naive, very straightforward, kind of lets things roll over him, makes quick decisions, goes on instinct rather than logic most of the time. That's the kind of character he is. So by necessity, Nami kind of is the one who has to steer things. But this results in her character yelling a lot. Because she's like, I think there's a comedic, I've seen it in other anime as well, kind of like a comedic style where you have the person who's kind of doing all the funny things, and then you have like what they would call like the straight man or the stern man or something like that, who's, the serious side of things, who's scolding the person who is making the foolish decisions, and she plays that role kind of a lot of the time, which, like I said, ends with her yelling a lot, which is frankly speaking kind of annoying from an audience perspective. But overall, I do like the character, so this isn't like a criticism necessarily on Nami saying I don't like the character. I just think she could do with not yelling so much, but unfortunately, that is ongoing throughout the series just because of the way that their interactions work on the crew. which makes her a little bit less likable. But overall, like I said, I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was really entertaining. There wasn't really much negatives beyond the excessive yelling and the foot play. And so I chose to rank this episode as a 9 out of 10 on the personal ranking. And again, because this is the last episode in the arc, we now have our definitive ranking for this arc. And that is that in first place, we have Luffy's pass. The red-haired Shanks appears. This episode got second place on the personal ranking, which is Who Will Win? Showdown between the true powers of the Devil Fruit. Third place was Grand Duel, Zoro the Swordsman versus Kabaji the Acrobat. In fourth place, we had Fear, Mysterious Power, Pirate Clown Captain Buggy. And then in the fifth place, we had Desperate Situation, Beast Tamer Moji versus Luffy, as my personal least favorite episode of this arc. So with our saga rankings, this is when we compare arcs within the saga to each other. So our first arc was the Romance Dawn arc, which scored on the mostly objective ranking 26 out of 30, making it 86.67%. With the Orangetown arc, because this was the last episode, we now have our final score of 38 out of 50, which is 76%, so it is still in second place, with Romance Dawn arc being in first place. On the personal side, however, we do have the Orangetown arc winning against the Romance Dawn arc, as I liked it a little bit better. So the Romance Dawn arc before was 20 out of 30, which was 66.67%. And then the Orangetown arc, after all of the episodes were totaled, reached 37 out of 50, and that was a score of 74%, putting it in first place. Now with the series ranking, this is where we're going to be scoring the sagas against each other. I know there's a lot of lists for One Piece, but that just has to do with the style of the way that the series is structured overall. Instead of being structured into seasons, it's got the sagas and the arcs. So that gives us an extra list. So in order to determine what the scores are going to be for the saga, whatever the percentage that we got on the arc was, that is going to indicate what the number score is for that saga. So in this case, on the objective, we got 76%, which is a 7 out of 10 for the Orangetown arc. And then in the case of the personal list, we scored 74%, which made it a 6 out of 10 for the Orangetown arc. Which means that our East Blue Saga is now at 16 out of 80 on our mostly objective ranking, and on our personal ranking, East Blue Saga so far has scored 11 out of 80. And with that, we have now rewatched and ranked One Piece East Blue Saga Orangetown Arc Episode 8, Who Will Win? Showdown between the true powers of the Devil Fruit. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.